For more on the latest twists and turns in the negotiations, we're joined by a Republican and a Democrat involved in the debate. First, Representative Peter Roskam of Illinois, a member of the Republican leadership. He also serves on the House Ways and Means Committee. Congressman Roskam, one of the things we seem to hear today, listening to the president and to Speaker Boehner, is that they both agree that there ought to be a vote on raising the debt ceiling and that the debt ceiling should be raised. Is that fair, that that's an area of agreement? Is that fair to say?
Well, I think there's an area of agreement that says that the trajectory of spending in Washington, D.C. fundamentally has to change. There was a bipartisan vote a few weeks ago in the House of Representatives that rejected on a bipartisan basis the notion of simply raising the debt ceiling without any preconditions. And what I think Speaker Boehner and others have said, and what I'm hearing from my congressional district, is that any increase in the debt ceiling needs to be coupled with cuts that are deeper than the increase.
When we're talking about cuts, we were talking last Friday, or at least the president and Speaker Boehner seemed to be talking in the range of $4 trillion. And now today we're hearing that at the meeting this afternoon, they were talking more in the range of $2 trillion. What is acceptable for Republicans?
Well, I think the big stumbling block right now is the president's insistence on raising taxes. And I think we need to go back 2 years ago in 2009 when President Obama was asked in Elkhart, Indiana, do you raise taxes during a recession? And he very eloquently, I think, answered the question, and he said, no, don't do that. And he laid out the economic reasons for not doing that. Now, look, this economy is begging for mercy. We're at 9.2% unemployment, and I think it's time to move off of this notion that somehow the remedy is to increase taxes on job creators. Let's focus in on these cuts. Let's make thoughtful and wise cuts, and let's come together on this in a fashion that makes sense all the way around.
Listening to both sides of this debate, it seems like one man's taxes or another man's revenue increases, and it's a question of whether you're talking about raising net taxes or raising or not increasing revenues at all. You can imagine that the average viewer trying to make sense of this doesn't know which definition you're talking about.
Well, here's the definition I think that should be guiding us. The Joint Committee on Taxation, which is a nonpartisan or a bipartisan entity here in the United States Congress, has said that 94% of all small businesses pay taxes at the individual income tax rate. So what does that mean? That means when you raise the individual income tax rate, you're having an adverse impact. You're raising taxes on job creators. Half of all income in the United States, or half of all revenues, are coming from business taxes. So this notion that we can somehow raise taxes on the very people that we want to put capital at risk, I think is a direction that the country has wholeheartedly rejected.
The Democrats, or at least the president, has said that he is willing to make some trimming of benefits a part of this package, and that's presumably affecting Social Security and Medicare, which has made some people in his party unhappy. He said both sides should be willing to take significant heat. What significant heat are Republicans willing to accept?
Well, the significant heat is raising the debt ceiling, accruing $2 more trillion in debt at a time when most Americans look at Washington, D.C. and say it is terribly disconnected to the reality of what they're dealing with in their own business and the reality of what they're dealing with in their homes. The notion of increasing the debt ceiling is a very unpleasant one.
So you're saying just the notion of increasing the debt ceiling is all that Republicans are willing to concede in this compromise?
What I'm saying is that Republicans are committed to making sure that small businesses don't see a tax hike at a very time when job creation is something that we are so hungry for, and that they are interested in a game changer. In other words, the notion that we can borrow and spend our way into prosperity, I think, is a fool's errand. It hasn't worked. We've seen a stimulus bill where we're 27 months out from a stimulus bill and unemployment is still over 9%. We're 12 months out from the so-called recovery summer, and it's been a miserable failure. Let's acknowledge the failure, let's move in a different direction, and let's move forward.
Here's what I'm missing, Congressman Roskam. You believe that the debt ceiling, do you believe that it would be a bad thing if the debt ceiling were not raised? And if you believe that, other than getting additional revenues, how do you do that?
I think you deal with the types of cuts that House Republicans proposed and passed through the House of Representatives in April of this year, a very thoughtful pathway to prosperity, ultimately, that begins to make sense. So that's where the lion's share of the energy should be. I think that if the president had devoted the same level of commitment and energy to cutting and those types of things and prioritizing that he has to raising taxes, I think we would be in a different position.
And does that include benefits cuts, in your opinion?
Well, we took on Medicare. For example, we said let's deal with folks who are basically in my age group. I'm 50 years old, take ages 54 and below, and you come up with a different trajectory on Medicare. So House Republicans have taken those tough votes and I think are prepared to stand by them.
You say tough votes. One of the things the president said today is that a lot of members of Congress may not be willing to make a lot of tough votes in the next 6 months because of elections. Do you see that argument at work behind the scenes, behind closed doors with the Republican conference, that people are a little bit nervous about what's going to happen in the fall if they take these votes now?
Well, I think if the president could rethink it, he'd want to shy away from actually arguing that you want to do what the public doesn't want you to do. In other words, is he saying that the closer you get to election, then that's going to really animate your behavior? I think what most Americans say is they want Washington, D.C. to do the right thing, whether it's November 1st or whether it's any other time of the year.
Congressman Peter Roskam of Illinois, thank you so much.
Thank you.